As you know, the left have hijacked language, and they use language as a weapon. They like to plant words like ideas in people's minds, and then they use those words as a dog whistle or a trigger in order to identify people who the public should naturally be against. Now, one of the words that I feel has been totally co-opted and is being used in the wrong way is narcissist and narcissism. This word became very popular about, I'd say, 7 to 8 years ago. And since then, it's been used entirely inappropriately, often like the word fascism. Let's look at some of the people who are regularly called narcissists. Well, Donald Trump, of course, he's the biggest one that gets called narcissist. Also, people like Nigel Farage. The judge, when Julian Assange went up in front of the judge recently, was called a narcissist. I don't know how you can call someone who's basically sacrificing his life and who's been in almost solitary confinement for so long just for the crime of putting the truth out there. And we all know WikiLeaks have never had to retract a story. No one's ever been able to say that anything that they have published is incorrect, not like newspapers who have to retract and go back on their words all the time. And he's paying with his life for this. That's a narcissist? I don't think so. Also kind of Nigel Farage, and of course another big one, they didn't like Oscar Pistorius. He was continually told that he was a narcissist. But isn't it strange that I've never heard anyone on the left or in the EU being called a narcissist? You know, Tony Blair, I've never heard him called one. Obama, you know, James O'Brien, Oprah, Juncker, Barnier, any of those? Angela Merkel. What about Mr. Macron, who spends 20 minutes in makeup and seems to be rather obsessed with his flawless image? No, funnily enough, none of those people are narcissists because they can't have one of these slur labels attached to them because they're being put up there as the poster child of the New World Order. Now, narcissists, in the way that's used by the media, they're generally referring to someone who is a bit of a show-off, someone who's outrageous, flamboyant, outspoken, someone basically who has a strong opinion, a mind of their own, and opinions that they don't like. That usually qualifies you to be a narcissist. Whereas in the real world, narcissism is a complex psychological manipulation technique that often takes place, in fact, mostly takes place behind closed doors. It's a dynamic in relationships and between people, and all of you guys probably know narcissists, but you might not even know it because in real life, they're well disguised and they're doing their manipulation behind closed doors. So I'm going to say to you what I think the left are actually the real narcissists, or should we say the New World Order or the left are the real narcissists, and they are the ones who are using all these manipulation techniques so key to narcissism. So the first one is gaslighting. It comes from the film Gaslight, which was a film in the 40s. And there was a husband and wife. He had some really shady things going on. She was beginning to twig and ask questions, and he kept trying to convince her that she was crazy, that she was imagining these things. It was all in her mind. It was all about her. She was wrong. He was the calm, rational, sane one, and she was crazy. And they gaslight us all the time with fake news. You know, they will tell you, whatever you believe, well, but that's wrong. That's fascists. That's phobic. They have a whole lot of names they can tell you to dissuade you from having opinions or to make you think that you are crazy, that you must be in the wrong. They put it out there that, well, if anyone wants to leave the EU, it's absolute nonsense. The country can't survive on its own. We need to be part of the club. We need to work together. Anyone who doesn't think that is obviously ignorant or ill-informed or not educated. They try and convince you of these things all the time, like the Russia narrative. Absolute fake news, but they put it out there again and again, gaslighting the public of it, convincing the public of a fake narrative. And of course, if you don't believe it, you are branded with these things like conspiracy theorist or far right or extremist to dissuade you from having the view that they don't want you to hold. So this is the gaslighting that goes on. Another key element to gaslighting is isolation. Because if you hold a view, you might think, well, the media are totally against my view. I must be the only one who thinks this way. But if you can go on chat rooms and forums and read comments, you'll read loads of comments and find that very far from being the only one who holds a certain view, you might find there are thousands just like you. And that's why gaslighting doesn't work if you don't isolate people. So what they're trying to do now is shut down comments, shut down Facebook channels, put people in Facebook jail, shut down YouTube channels so they can recreate the isolation again. So that you go back and within your family circle, you might discuss things, but you don't discuss them anywhere else. And you really are not aware what other people are thinking because they can't use this gaslighting, fake news technique if people are all talking and agreeing with each other that it's nonsense because you form your own narrative in the public arena away from their echo chambers, and they don't want that. So they want us all to be isolated from each other and not talking to each other, and then it works much better. Narcissistic behavior is always extremely controlling, extremely authoritarian, and I don't have to tell you how authoritarian and controlling the left is. I mean, of course. It's about manipulating every event. It's about manipulating news. It's about manipulating narratives to paint a picture that they want you to buy into, and so that you will go along with the things they propose. I think that's a little bit of problem, reaction, solution happening then. As far as the left go, one thing that also goes along with narcissism is gifting, generosity. So that's why people on the left are often saying, "Oh, we'll give you free education, free university fees," because it creates an aura of, well, that's nice. What's wrong with that? That seems all fine. Oh, a fairer society for all. What could be possibly wrong with that? Oh, we're all going to get more. Tax breaks. They use things like that in order to woo people and to see the softer side when they've probably got no intention of actually delivering, but they create this rouge. There's going to be a lot of gifts and generosity towards the public, because then people are less inclined to see the nasty undercurrents underneath and more inclined to see what they might be getting for free. Religions are also quite narcissistic as well. They use many of the same techniques. So the left has actually taken these techniques from religions. Another thing they do, narcissists, excommunication. That's what the church loved to do with people they didn't like. Oh, you'd be excommunicated. Effectively, that's now happening to us as well, because you can be thrown off Facebook, Twitter, whatever. You are effectively being excommunicated, and that's also a way that they control you. There's always double standards with narcissists. And of course, we obviously know that it goes on in the left. It's fine for them to have certain bigoted, hypocritical positions. It's fine for them to say things, but it's never fine for the people on the right to say them. You can see it's actually come back to bite a few people, because even Nigel Farage was jumping on the bandwagon with Carl Benjamin, saying, oh, he's this and that. But now Nigel, the boot is on the other foot when he's having to defend comments made by Anne Widdecombe, which also not seen as politically correct. So it does tend to come back and bite everyone when you do these double standards. I'd say another key proponent of double standards is Sadiq Khan. Has a lot to say about Donald Trump, whereas Sadiq Khan is quite happy to fight for the right for people like Louis Farrakhan to come over, who has extremely intolerant, outrageous views, has said some absolutely appalling things that if anyone else said them, there'd be hell to play. Okay. Narcissists love to undermine you, and of course that's what the left like to do. They use fake polls, and they use interviewing tactics to try and undermine certain characters on the right, to distract them, and to continually find ways of getting them, find things in their past, anything they can do to detract from those people. That's also a key tactic. The left also like to use, or the powers that be, the elites, like to use the power of societal policing. So they play on people's concern about what the great they think. So they like to brand people with slogans, with slurs, like I say, calling people bigoted, far-right, little Englanders, racist, small-minded, low information, because people immediately take that on board and they think, well, I don't want my friends to think that I'm a person like that. And it helps to keep people quiet, and it stops people from expressing their views, because they are led to believe that these particular body of opinions could lead to them losing friends and being ostracized in society. So they like to kind of ostracize. That goes along with that other pattern of isolating people. They're quite passive-aggressive narcissists, and I do think that happens a lot with the left, very passive-aggressive. They almost like to provoke, to prod, to poke the bear in the cage until they get the reaction that they want, and then they're able to say, oh, look, there, you see, I told you so. So it's very important always with narcissists not to give any reaction, because that's exactly what they're looking for. And once you've given that reaction, they've got exactly what they want. Bingo. That's what they were looking for all along. There's also a degree of the ad hominem attack. And narcissists will never attack your argument. They'll attack you. So if you say, well, I think borders are a good idea because the facts show that they can reduce crime, they can reduce drugs. So, for example, you present the facts about borders. They won't argue the facts with you. They'll go straight and say, I can't believe you would say that. That is, so intolerant. What about, that's ridiculous. They'll attack you, your personality. They'll go against your character and make out that you must be some sort of uncaring, authoritarian, or ruthless person, rather than addressing the fact that you've actually presented some facts to back up why you think that. They will never address you on those facts. They'll address your character and try and make you feel guilty for having that opinion, even though it was factually accurate. There's also a degree of the Munchausen by proxy thing going on with narcissists. And in the government or the left, what do they say? They'll tell you, there's this oppressed group of people over there, and they really need help. So give me a lot of money, give me power, and I'll help them. And so you give them money and you give them power. 10 years later, those people are still oppressed. They haven't been helped. And the argument, well, I didn't get enough power. Oh, I didn't get enough money. Keep believing in me. Keep voting for me. They use that, so they find groups who they can trade off and use the either the vulnerability or the problems of a certain group in order to enhance their own power. And do they ever end up doing anything for these groups? No. I mean, I think the Democrats are a case in point about that. People have been voting Democrats in these cities for years. Nothing ever changes. The narcissist also likes to create something called learned helplessness, where you feel that whatever you do, you get the same outcome. And they're doing that very effectively with voting, because people know, well, you vote whatever party. We were voting for Blair, then we had Cameron, we had the Lib Dem government with Cameron, or people in America have been voting Republican, Democrat. You just get the same result, whichever way you go. That creates apathy to voting among people. They're also doing it with the Brexit vote. They're showing them, well, they can't have what they voted for, so let's teach them that voting doesn't get you anywhere. So people won't bother. And that is ultimately what they would like, is to wean us off this idea of democracy, get us so fed up with voting because we never see a difference, and then we won't vote. Just an interesting experiment that was done to prove this learned helplessness. They took 2 sets of dogs. So there were about 8 dogs in each group, same sort of mix of breeds and kinds of dogs. And in both pens, the dogs were given electric shock and the pens were closed. But in the first pen, there was a lever. And when the electric shock started, if the dogs jumped on the lever, it stopped the shocks. And the dogs soon learned that if they jumped on the lever, the shock stopped. In the other pen, there was no lever and there was nothing the dogs could do about stopping the shocks. Then in the second phase of the experiment, they opened the doors in each pen and they started the electric shocks. So in the first pen, where there was the lever, as soon as the shock started, the dogs saw the door open, bolted for the door and ran out the pen. In the second pen, where there'd never been a lever, as soon as the shock started, the dogs just stood and took it. They didn't even run for the open door. They just stood and took it. And what the narcissists in the government, in the elites, very often on the left, are trying to do is turn us into the dogs in the second pen. We feel helpless. We've given up. We think we just have to submit. We think there's no way of changing the political trajectory. We think everything is a given. And even when there's an open door, we won't bolt for it. So we've always got to remember, we cannot let ourselves be like those dogs. We have to be like the other dogs who can recognize when there are windows of opportunity and bolt out that door to keep ourselves free, to keep our democracy, and to keep us safe from the real narcissists.